The information within this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as advice nor substituted for qualified professional counseling or mental health therapies. If you are genuinely in need of deeper assistance, please seek the advice of qualified professionals.
Hey, this is Drew Marriage from the Unpacking Greek podcast. Our next episode is very special. What was originally intended as a planning session unfolded into the spontaneous, beautiful hour-long conversation about life, death, love, and the interconnectedness of everything. I'm so happy to share it with you. Dr. Lisa M. Christie is a spiritual ego-feminist and author of the upcoming book, Reality Unbound. She enthusiastically teaches about and explores psychic experiences and their link to reality. Lisa often speaks at major conferences and helps humanity connect their spiritual and religious insights with nature's sacredness. I'm grateful for our time together. Thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy.
I'm an experiencer since childhood. I was raised in a family that didn't believe in religion. It didn't believe in life after death. It was a strictly this world, philosophical, materialist point of view, although it wasn't expressed in those words. And so my connection with what is beyond that began as a child when my sister and I saw a ghost walking up to my mother's room. So I can go into that story in some more depth later if you like. But my education, I pursued a career in high technology for many years. And then I was really pulled towards a doctoral degree in philosophy and religion, concentrating in women's spirituality. So from a woman's voice. And in the course of that, I continued to open up spiritually, and my experiences and my understanding grew, and ultimately my dissertation sought to create a bridge between and to better understand my experiences, because the worldview I'd been brought up with, the philosophical materialism, that the world is a mechanism and that we're the only conscious beings. Within that context, these experiences were, of telepathy and clairvoyance and communicating with those who had passed over, visionary experiences with other spirits, physical, pulling me out, seeing symbols in trance that I later found in ancient artwork, and, having experiences of the collective subconscious, so to speak. Young calls it the collective unconscious. I think so much of this can become conscious. And so, for myself, I had insights into ancient religions that I thought on their face, the images I was seeing seemed ridiculous to me. But then I learned about how they were really interrelated in ancient Egyptian religion, for example. So I had all of these experiences, and I asked the question, what is the nature of reality in which these experiences make sense and are telling us something about the nature of reality? And I hoped to be able to make short work of that, but it ended up being the subject of a 900 plus page doctoral dissertation. And I found that, the way I approached it was to think about these experiences and to hold them in my body. So, in terms of methodology, we call that a phenomenological method, where we're feeling these experiences. And what is the information that the experience is giving us, putting aside our preconceptions as much as possible, and then to hold it together in what's called a synthesis, and the technical term is heuristic synthesis, to say, does this change the figure ground of our experience a bit? What is the way of being in the world that really reflects these larger breadth of experiences being real? What is that like? And I found that I was surprised by the way it shifted my understanding of reality. And then I sought to be able to express that as a philosophical paradigm, and found I was able to do that drawing on the work of Alfred North Whitehead and his process philosophy. So the book that I'm working on right now is a rewrite of the dissertation. All the more evidence is coming in from parapsychology and other fields of science that is compatible with this reality that was emerging from these experiences. So, I come at this conversation as a researcher of exceptional human experiences, as well as an experiencer myself, and as someone who um, can talk about what those experiences tell me about the nature of ourselves and the nature of the world and how all of this is possible. So I have, a lot of personal experience with entities outside of bodies, entities who have died coming into my body, coming into my husband's body. I regularly work with a group that embodies greater beings of different kinds. This has all become just a normal and natural part of my life. And there's so much research on this. And what I would love to do is to, perhaps we can talk a little bit more in terms of an overview of the scope of the experiences that support the continuation of consciousness after death. But, at some point in the future, I would love to take a deep dive where I can really bring in, specific stories of life after death, including, near-death experiences, mediumship experiences, apparitions, between lives experiences, because there's really so much that's there in support of it, and a great cumulative case to be made for the reality of the continuation of consciousness after death. And, I have lost those who are close to me. I've lost my father in a tragic accident. My husband died of stage 4 cancer, and I've lost dearly beloved pets, and I've interacted with all of them in some way, since they transitioned. So,
Sorry for all of your
yeah,
loss.
thank you. And I am sorry for your loss of your son, because I've known other people who have lost their children, and it is devastating. And, I really appreciate how you've taken that experience and created something that can give people a lot of comfort. I know how much comfort it gave me to, first of all, I had already been convinced about life after death, but feeling my husband, for example, hold me uh, after he had died, and to come through. He had promised when he was dying in the hospital, initial part of his dying. We had lost our father a couple of years before. My sister is a Christian, and she knew that my father was not a believer in her religion and wasn't saved according to her point of view. And so she was afraid that he would be burning in hell. And that gave her a great deal of distress. And so, she was able to eventually, it took her years of torment, worrying for him, until she connected with mediums who were able to bring her insights and messages from him. I had an experience of him right away after the funeral, so I knew he was okay, but she needed to know for herself. And mediumship helped give her that comfort. It was near death before I took him home for hospice care. He had been awake from a coma, and he spoke with my sister, and she said, "Promise me, when you pass, please come back and let us know you're all right." And he said, "I will." And he did. He did. And it's such a comfort.
It is, and it's my earliest personal experience with mediumship was happenstance. And again, I've gone through so much where I realized that obviously everything happens for a reason. I could see that my timeline everywhere along the way and every experience was built subsequently for the next moment as it would turn out in my life. And the biggest loss that I had experienced was that of my dad. Unfortunately, we did not have the relationship that I would have wanted. And so it was on tough terms, and he had Alzheimer's. So he was
luckily we found, him care in the VA hospital in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. And I was there when he passed away, but within a few weeks, I had a very vivid experience where I was walking out of the house and my father was coming from where my grandmother lived down the street, maybe 7 houses down. And I knew in the dream that he didn't belong there.
Yeah.
And I told him as much. And I went to shake his hand, and it was the handshaking that my dad was a truck driver and he had big hands and he was raised on a farm. It was that woke me up out of my sleep. And I come to be able to describe this for others as a visitation. It wasn't a dream, it was
Yeah.
visitation. And, those also are something that I feel it would be helpful if folks could better sort out for themselves when they occur, and to be able to, again, also not only sort it out for themselves, but to build community where they can share these experiences. But the other one that I had was actually in a car. I had dialed into a radio show, same time period. The gentleman actually was able to, read me over the phone. And back then, it's
Mhm.
like, wow, not only is he a medium
Yeah.
or a psychic, but he read me over the phone. And then how
Mhm.
little do we know that doesn't matter, that was just
Mhm.
the circumstance. He dialed into the energy and he described my grandmother at the time and my mom's mom in an apron, my father and stuff like that. So they affirmed a lot of the things that were needing affirming for me personally. So, the mystical has always been of great interest. And I also want to go back to your earliest experience. If you'd like to talk about that a little
Mhm.
more, I'd like to talk about both the phenomenon of ghosts, and it seems as if much in the way of the UFO, it's taken on a different life. It doesn't feel as if it's spoken of as much. I don't know what we might attribute that to, but I find it interesting nevertheless. And also, are you subsequently suspicious in any way of these gifts, or from your own perspective, or even
Mhm.
be able to bouncing off of your sister,
Mhm.
realizing that this is what it is, and only from the context of everyone outside, like, wow,
Yeah.
it's just us. Yet there's something going on here, and how that kind of unfolded in your life, despite of your educational pursuits and all, being able to synthesize this, which I think is wonderful in and of itself.
Thank you. Yeah, the first experience that I had, and I always check out my experiences. My first question is, what normal thing could be happening that would lead that. But when I was I was probably 9 years old, and my sister and I shared a room. We had bunk beds, and the bunk beds, the head of our bed faced the door, which was open to a bright hallway. Across the hallway was a steps up to the attic, and the door was open because it had been partially refinished as a sewing and crafts room for my mom. And so we were just talking, and we weren't sleepy, and we were just kind of facing the door. I saw a shade of a man beginning to walk up the first flight of stairs to the attic. I asked my sister, "Did you see that?" She said, "Yes, it was a man walking up the stairs to the attic." Now, as a grown person, I think, well, weren't they worried about the mother? But for us, it was a shadow, and we didn't, think too much about it. And to us, it was just a bit of a marvel. And I don't even know if we mentioned it to my mother.
I think that there's a bit of intuition that comes with the gift that, that also offsets that disturbing potentiality where you
Yeah.
think, okay, well, I see this, it's unusual, but
Yeah.
it's also
Right. And I knew that no one in my family believed in such things. So, my sister and I might have touched on it occasionally over the years. And then, oh gosh, decades later, probably around 2009, 2010, my sister, who had that experience with me, called me to let me know that the current owner of the home had been trying to find the other families who had lived there. She connected with my sister, and her daughter had been seeing the shadow of a man around the basement area. So it was very, I was not surprised, but it's always nice to be able to point to an experience where you have multiple witnesses and even across time.
Was it ever resolved? I have to ask. I mean, my audience would be upset with me if I didn't find out.
Well,
Did they
of
find
course,
out who it may have been?
we don't have an update on that. I wish that we did, but they did. Obviously it's confirmed there is somebody who is, living in that house along with them. And, I suspect it was one of the earlier owners of it. And I think that's what the people who are looking into it thought, someone who had lived there maybe in the 1920s or earlier. So
Moving further into the world together, I mean, how did that unfold? Did you and your sister maintain a very close relationship, where these experiences were more common, more shared, or more where you could call your sister, whether she was on the other coast, and say, hey, yes, there's a telepathy. How did that telepathy play out in your?
My sister continues to be open-minded with regard to those things, and I've shared some of my experiences with her, and it's nice to do that. And I've found that I'm able to do it with some of my other family members too. My father's passed, and everyone else seems to be more open. Interestingly, when that came up, that family had sought us out. My sister said, I had another experience with him, the ghost, that I had never mentioned to you. And that is one night he came in and sat on my bed. So she was in the lower bunk. She saw him come in the room. She felt him sit down, and she was so frightened she closed her eyes. And she had never mentioned that. I'm not sure why not. But I later had an experience like that, maybe a year or so later, when I had my best friend at the time, named Mimi, told me that there was a ghost that she heard walking around at night at her house. And she wanted me to come over and spend the night so that we could wake each other up if we heard that, and then confront the ghost together. Really, it was fascinating, and I definitely had the scary factor in that experience.
I do want to ask you, in the realm of terminologies and vocabulary, and some of the two most interchangeable are supernatural and paranormal. Whether or not they're used properly, you may know better than others. I don't know how you view them. But in terms of the larger audience, I think that paranormal has, whether it's correct or not, it's had the attributed definition of, well, this TV show you see, the hidden cameras, detecting things with
Yeah.
equipment and such. And then there's supernatural, and there's me that used to be, beyond the things,
Mhm.
unmeasurable, just things that you could not touch in a sense.
Yeah.
So, and it's a segue into an experience I had where I actually heard Zach call out to me, and then it later was confirmed by, in a session with our medium friend, where it was just simple yo. And he knew it would be familiar. It caught me, and is just as I was starting to sleep. So I think that he knew when to get me, and he got through, and he was actually gleeful in the session that he's like, oh, good. I'm glad you heard that.
Yeah.
So maybe you can also talk about that, what the quantum mechanics are behind,
Yes.
their audience.
Yeah. I so appreciate that you brought up the terms supernatural and paranormal. I don't think that these experiences are supernatural. I think that they're natural. I don't think that means they boil down to a, a mechanistic worldview at all. I think it's really quite the opposite. But I think that they're normal experiences that everybody can experience. It's just that our brains tend to act more as a filter of more subtle events. Events that are usually more subtle, and that in order that we can focus on the things that are important for our bodily survival. So I think we automatically filter a lot out. Many indigenous cultures teach their children at a young age how to tune in and to be able to experience these things more easily and naturally. But we live in a culture today that denies them. And so even when young children are remembering a past life, or talking to a spirit, or are reading minds, or just know things, either they're told that they're delusional, right? Because the modern worldview says these things are impossible. So obviously it has to be a delusion. Or some religious traditions say that they are, they're not of God, that they're of the devil because, God exists in another realm and we shouldn't have spirits running around here. So they have to be demonic. And so, people who have these experiences, who don't have the support of a community or this kind of information, can either think that they're, question their own experience and sanity, or they may be afraid of their own experiences and try to suppress it and feel threatened by it. And so I think it's helpful to have conversations like this and information like this because it helps people to feel like this is not some supernatural event. This is the way things really are. And we're just, as a culture, I think more and more coming around to that point of view, but very slowly because we're so embedded in a Newtonian worldview. We haven't even begun to take, we're just beginning and only in certain parts of our culture to take into account what are the implications of quantum physics, for example, where you can have entangled events and where we as subjects have some influence on the realities that we're observing, and there are people who are bringing those areas together theoretically.
For the benefit of empowerment, as we spoke earlier, I only come to realize with the passage of time that my gift came from my mom. I know that when I lost Zach, that I had already laid the foundation for healing in terms of where I was. I was already a seeker. I was learning and taking in as much information as I could. So when the loss came, I was better suited to withstand that initial shock. And that's something where it's hard for people every day to get their mind around. Obviously, the loss is already a taboo, so no one wants to talk about it. But to get the word out that all these misconceptions, whether it was driven by religion or your upbringing outside of religion, just what the truths that you've adopted over time that made your relationship with death and loss so crippling, and being able for folks to actually want to let that go and look for an alternative view without that can coexist with their religion. Unfortunately, people think they have to sacrifice a religion for the benefit of their healing, and they think that martyrdom is. And sometimes we also know that healing isn't forever. But I know many people who are in pain and they're managing and they're getting through. And each day is a new opportunity and they go forward. And I find many of them are finding purpose in transmuting their pain into art or education or something different that honors their lost one.
Yeah. And when we can make something constructive from our pain and our loss, especially that helps other people, then perhaps we're tapping into something of our purpose.
So, with that said, and everyone having that inherent gift and only being able to either have it opened by circumstance, searching, whatever the case is, the gifts and the signs that come through, it's not just an arbitrary cardinal. It's very cliche. Yes, that's one that was given to us, in my opinion, so that everyone may participate in that sacred experience of their loved one experienced as a cardinal, because they were lost into everything. But you can pinpoint it as that sign. So I've grown accustomed to realize that I'm spoken to through numbers. I get a lot of my messages through numbers, and more often lately, synchronicities that are just kind of odd. But there's the deja vu aspect, but then there's also very obscure mentions of terms like Dorchester or as a foreshadowing for me. And then within a certain very small period of time, this obscure thing that I took note of actually is spoke, and it's just interesting. I don't know what to make of it. I welcome all of the idiosyncratic signs that come through, but are there other ways and other means that you're aware of that our loved ones on the other side may try and poke their loved one and get their attention outside of the obvious?
Right, right. Well, the time one, as you mentioned, is a common one, and in fact, I could tell you a story about a discarnate entity who used to play with my husband and I with time, and getting us to look at certain times, and we would spend, all day long, we would have, 11, 11, 12, 12, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, all day long. And we called her the time queen because of
So,
the
and
way
and
she,
could you please lean into that a little more
yeah,
and give her form for someone like me and our listeners,
yeah,
the time queen. So,
yeah.
there's these coming through as memes for many in Instagram and other venues, but
Uh-huh.
I'm very fascinated by that term. Tell me more about the time queen.
Well, my husband was a mediumistic, and I've had my own experiences with him. And we had some, when people can be heard, they like to be heard by someone who's embodied. And so, they knew that he could definitely hear them. And so they began to hang around with us and we called them our family. One was a lady named Annette Joyce, and she had lived on a farm in Michigan and really tragically died in an accident. Where her truck went into a ditch, and then she's a very ordered person, and wanting to help us with things, but also very structured. And the next person who decided to join our little group was named Drusilla, and she had lived in the Appalachian Mountains in the backwoods and had run White Lightning. She was a bootlegger, and she was not having any kind of authority. And so, as you might imagine, she and Annette bumped heads a lot, and sometimes they did it through us, our bodies. They would come into our bodies. They liked to eat. Annette, they used to go to Vienna and listen to music because Annette was very classically oriented, but they liked to eat. And my husband was a great cook. Just as an example of some of the fun things that would happen is I'm not a food person. My husband was trained as a chef, very much a food person, enjoys food thoroughly, or enjoyed it, probably still does. And Annette apparently had been with my husband, and Drusilla apparently with me, and I didn't know it. But I was enjoying this meal like I had never enjoyed a meal. And I was eating continually and enjoyed it. And Annette spoke in Bill and said, "Well, you're sure eating a lot. That's not typical of you." And it was like, oh my gosh, you're right. And I stopped, and I could feel Drusilla indignant. How dare you interrupt this meal?
That's so
So,
funny.
and I, it was kind of fun because I grew really fond of them, and sometimes I would see Annette and Bill, there's two dimensions to it. One is just being able to psychically perceive another personality. It's like, I know it's a pattern of sorts. And the other is that when they're in a body, they shift things a little bit. Some people would call this possession and think it's scary, and sometimes it's not appropriate. But these were friendly people. They weren't going to take over our bodies. We just had this kind of casual relationship with them.
That's fascinating. For me, I listen and I try and figure out, you know, who or how many who's, because I am not as open to I can't feel or see the entities as you, and I'm very well off, happy that I can't, and that's fine by me. I recognize again, where there's a time, the times that my mom passed, that my son passed, birthday dates, my dad's 218. So those numbers are, nods, in my opinion, from them at any given time. Music's also a big one, and I think a big driver, and I think also a big underutilized modality for healing. Can we talk about music, and did it have a role in healing when you lost your husband?
You had asked about signs, and how did I know? My father passed first, so I'll talk about him. And that is, we had a really nice service for him, and we spoke, and we told stories. It felt good. It felt like a really good service. And as I was driving, my father was always against life after death. I had told him about a friend of his who had died years ago. And to try to make a long story short, his friend died in a murder-suicide. He had killed his grandmother and then shot himself or killed himself. He had been a troubled person as long as I knew him as a little kid. As kids, we always wanted to stay away from him. It was still a shock that he did that. And then when I was an adult and I was living on my own, he came to me in a luminous body and said, "I'm at peace." And I was really glad to see it. And I mean, he felt trustworthy. He felt good. He really felt peaceful. There's a quality that sometimes people close to death have of just being filled with spirit of some kind. So I had told my father about this. So this is how resistant my father was to life after death. Said, "Jimmy, appeared to me and he said this, and I think that I'm to get you this message." And he said, yeah, Lisa, and, Lisa's off with her beliefs, Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's okay. I didn't expect it, but I was really hoping to get a message to him, because why would Jimmy appear to me? I didn't, maybe he thought, here's a kid who was scared of me. And, now I can tell her that I'm at peace. I'm all right. He was loved and he wasn't suffering in some kind of a hellscape. He was all right.
Your role as a messenger actually is also fascinating, because I did come to learn through communication with a core group of our friends, that they'll see something that applies to one of us, maybe me. And it's like, listen, maybe Drew's too busy, but for some reason I'm seeing Marilyn Monroe, and I think it's a Zach thing. So here it is. And we would share those, and I take that, and after it happened a few times, I start making it another one of my missions to deliver those messages as well, to look past the awkwardness. I worked corporate America. I've been around, and I've had plenty of awkward conversations. So when it has such value to someone to be able to and say, "I'm hearing this. I think it has something to do with you. Please take it, leave it. I'm giving this to you." And having the courage to step out of your comfort zone and actually be the universe speaking, being in a position to actually free someone, release someone, give a message, that I think is it's a gift to tell someone something there that they were not expecting to hear, that illuminates their path to healing.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it can make a huge difference. So here's my father, who did not believe in life after death, appearing to me. I was driving in the car, and the way he came to me, it was like I could see him clearly in my mind's eye, and he was smiling and he was illuminated. Again, there's often this light, kind of a white light, but it's like almost like illuminated from within. And he was getting me the message, that he was very pleased with the service that we made for him. And with my husband, as I had mentioned, he had promised to let us know he was okay. And the first thing that I heard from him was actually a couple of months after he passed. After he had passed, my sister had made available to me a timeshare in Lake Tahoe to go by myself and have some time. And while one afternoon, early evening, I went into the bathroom to brush my hair, and I felt him step up behind me and just wrap his arms around me. And it was very light touch, but the warmth and the love were so strong and so obvious. And I just stood there for a long time, just feeling that, not wanting that moment to end.
You were present, and time does stop, and
Yeah.
even as you recount it, you are living it again. It's
Yeah.
it's a gift that keeps giving.
Right. And then another sister of mine, Cheryl, and I, she knew Bill pretty well as well. And we had on Thanksgiving, we had a Thanksgiving at my mother's house, and the turkey was in the kitchen, and we had carved it and taken it in the other room to eat. And as we were after dinner, Cheryl and I were standing in the kitchen, and I felt him with us as plain as day. It was like I feel his presence. It was like, again, warmth. And clearly with his signature, there's a way that we know who people are. And before I had a chance to speak, Cheryl said, I feel like Bill's right here with us right now in the kitchen. So it was really nice to share that experience with her.
It is.
And then my sister Farron and I went to Teresa Caputo's show. You may know her as a television medium, the Long Island medium. And we went to her show, and we also had an opportunity to speak with her afterwards. And Teresa spoke about our father to my sister Farron and how he had died, which was in a fire. So it's not an average way that people die. But Teresa was speaking right to that, to her and die. And my sister was starting to feel that sense of, oh my gosh, you're talking to him. He's all right. And then later, she spoke about a man who was saying that he was sorry that his personality changed so much, in the times leading up to his death. And she said her symbol for that was somebody throwing their hospital tray. And it's true that my husband had, for several years before his death, had embraced his grumpy. And so that really connected to me. I really felt he was speaking to me. So afterwards, we had the opportunity to meet with Teresa, and I was wearing some of his ashes and a heart around my neck. And she said, my sister was talking about our father to Teresa, saying that's right, validating what she had told her. But Teresa said, are those your husband's ashes? I said, yes. And she said, he's telling me you were married for 35 years. He seems like really like we've been married for that long. And I said, no, it's 30 years. And she said, no, he's telling me 35. And then I remembered that he and I had a private ceremony where we married for the first time 5 years before our official marriage. And it was definitely him, because I know his manner of, talking.
His extravagance, his love language.
Yes, yes. And then here's another way messages came. My sister was working with a medium in Scotland. This was a woman who didn't have a practice. She was just really good at what she did, and she was willing to help my sister. So my sister, had been in Europe for business, traveled by train to Scotland, and met with this medium in a village in Scotland. And she was there to talk to our father. And a man kept interrupting the conversation, and it was Bill. And he kept saying, tell her I love her. And, he was still getting messages to me, and he was apologizing for specific things that had happened in our marriage. Farron called me when she was on the train leaving, and I was at work, and I found a little room, a little small conference room where we could talk. And, I had tears, I was crying, listening to this. And Farron was gushing about it and saying she really was feeling like, Bill, please stop interrupting. I'm going to talk to Dad. But apparently they know each other, on the other side, my father and my husband, even though they didn't get along tremendously well in life. But, they know each other. They always respected each other. And, there's more to say about that, because when my husband was literally dying, he was in a hospital bed at home, and I was sleeping on the floor. I slept in the bed part of the night, but it's a very narrow bed, so I slept on the floor next to him. And this was a kind of a dream, but not a dream, where I saw him sitting on the edge of his bed and packing a suitcase. And I asked him, are you going somewhere, honey? And he said, yes. And then I saw a room full of people. I could see a whole foyer full of people waiting for him. And I didn't recognize most of them, but they were packed in, like they were waiting for him. And in the back, I saw our dad, and he was looking up over the crowd and caught my eye, just looking at me with this solemn gaze. Yeah.
Beautiful and amazing memory. And it's another perfect segue. I'd like to ask you, as kind of a two-sided coin, both as, a medium, I would ask Is there advice you could give people in the audience who are at a place where they are considering working with a medium, things to maybe look for, how to approach the session in a healthy way? There are folks out there, unfortunately, that do harm,
Right,
whether intentional or not.
right.
And I would hate to advocate for someone to reach out in such a delicate way, only to be rewarded with someone who does not protect them in their grief.
Yes.
So there's that. And then your own kind of policy. Part of me was hoping that, there would be a little clamoring on the door, and what your policy is with how you close off the spirits, because I have friends who, they come in, and she coexists with them, and then you just also have to shut it down to get anything done. Also talk about your own, how you conduct
Mhm.
yourself in that.
Well, first of all, I'm an accidental occasional medium. I'm not professional. So, it's just been the case where I may be, eating dinner or I was talking to someone and then another person was talking through me. I don't do anything like this professionally. And I don't think I'm good enough that spirits are clamoring to come through me. But as a lay person with an opinion on
In terms of
this.
ethics, I guess is the
Yeah,
best way to approach the subject
yeah,
in mediumistic
yeah.
ethics.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you are so right to bring up the fact that there are a lot of charlatans and con artists and scammers in this area. In fact, and sometimes I'm on social media, and sometimes there are scammers who put up a picture of me and change my name a little bit, but kind of make it look they're duplicating my account to a great degree. And then they're trying to sell people psychic readings. So it's just apparently it's a lucrative space for scammers. And so the first thing that comes to mind is that it's good to get a recommendation from someone and find out about their experience. You shouldn't be spending a lot of money on a medium. I think really good mediums, they need to make a living, but they're not all about the money. This is a spiritual endeavor for them. And so they're also being of service to the highest good, to their idea of divinity, and they truly want to help people. So getting a good recommendation, looking them up and online, seeing what other people have to say about them, and also don't give them information. Allow them to tell you. My mom talks to a medium, and I think she's wonderful, to talk to her cat, who she was very close to. But my mom tells her all about the cat. She tells them all about what's going on herself. And so no one would actually have to have a gift in order to tell my mother what the cat would have to say to her. So, be careful with what you're feeding back to the medium. Allow it to really come from them.
I would also add that either a self-imposed, this was a policy that was introduced later with one of the professionals we worked with, that they will only meet with you every 6 months. Because what I did see and detect, which I think from a policy standpoint should be implemented, there is an addiction that also has an adverse effect on the healing. It defeats the purpose of it.
Yes.
It's not a matter of attachment, in my opinion, it's a matter of affirmation. I think that if you meet with one really good medium, they can equip you with the tools to really. It's not a question of when the loss happens. Like, how am I going to do this? And it moves from that to a place eventually where it's a practical question. You can say, how can I do this? I'm here and I'm in terrible pain, but how can I do this?
Yeah.
And that is the troubleshooting. That is the way forward. So that sort of policy for yourself, and to not be a victim, and to honor that it's there as a gift, and it's not supposed to be a crutch.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I agree with you. I think you need to be wary if somebody's trying to make you dependent on them. And if they can encourage you in your own ways of experiencing your beloved, then I think that's helpful too. Something I'm certain of is that when we're really focused on a connection, whether the person is still living or whether their body has no longer functioned and they've moved on to a different state of being, is that when we really think of somebody, they feel it at some level. If we're thinking of a living person, it may be subconscious to them, or depending upon the circumstances, their priorities, their situation, it could bubble up to their conscious awareness at the time or in a dream. But when someone is out of their body, they don't have the filter of the human body, and they receive that connection much more easily. So in my experience, when I'm connected to somebody, whether they're living or they're, I'd say, transitioned, is that I can have a feeling of focus and feeling into them. And sometimes I can feel that subtle sense of a connection on their end, feeling back into me. And when that happens, then I know that there's a really clear connection. And I think that we can trust when we speak from our heart to our loved ones that they can hear us. You mentioned that, our beloved ones can speak to us through entities in nature. And yes, they can. And yes, there's a sense in which we are all so much larger and more expansive and part of the all, than we may have been raised to know. And so we can speak through all these mechanisms. My father, for example, spoke to my sister by having a old voicemail from him suddenly just start talking on her phone. Well, she was on a treadmill and suddenly her phone started talking. It was my dad talking to her, right? There's an ability to speak to us through the environment, but we can also just speak directly to them from our heart and be confident that they hear us and they know. And when you're on the other side, and I have a lot of reasons for believing this, telepathy is just a normal way of communicating. It's our most foundational way of communicating and of knowing the world. So when they can hear us easily, and they can feel our thoughts and they can feel our feelings. And I believe they can, they have more access to the past and potentially to the possible futures as well. It's just the blinders are off. And as some have described it, there's a kind of a 360-degree vision, so it's not quite as narrow a channel as a vision or hearing. It's much broader. And so, I think, we can be comforted in knowing that they hear us, that you don't have to wait for a medium to come back in order to get somebody a message.
Exactly. We've since moved from where we lost Zach, and my mom as well. We lost her on Father's Day years ago. And being here now, it's a game changer. There was, 10 years, 11 years of life together in that home. And then the preparation for moving and getting rid of things. It's a cathartic exercise. And then what remains is now you think that, well, we move and Zach and mom are in the house, but we knew better. It now enables us to take, as you said, the blinders are off with regard to us. And, what may be a 10-minute ride to the YMCA down the road, for me, for one person is 10 minutes, 20 minutes in the car. That's actually next to me. Song comes on and the weather's beautiful and he's thinking about a motorcycle ride or what have you. And that's the lifestyle. That is the progression of all of these little paradigm shifts that I want to encourage and folks going through grief with your help to encourage to, provide resources and tools to again understand what is, the cult is not a 4-letter word. They used to wave a cult to scare you and dissuade you from pursuing, I think, vital knowledge. And what a cult is, well, it's hidden. It's hidden from you. But being able to peel the layers back of the onion and understand what the ethers are, and being able to visualize when you're in session with a medium and someone is speaking, like they tell me, well, listen, there's a room over there and there's about 15 people. There's 2 up front and the rest are kind of in the background. And that seems to be a trend. And in your depiction of a gallery. And, so it's interesting how these forms come into being.
Yes.
They give us a construct, and it manifests within you in a way that's tangible, so you can talk about it as a gallery. This is the
Right.
gallery of your love and family who are there waiting for you. Again, it's powerful. I think that it's impactful for folks who can really embrace a different way of thinking. And I don't I quantum healing is what you make it. It is an avenue, it is a modality in my opinion. And continuing to talk and have dialogue and give it structure and thought forms, it brings it out and it makes it a reality. The glossary and folks being able to connect. I would love to continue at another time. And are there anything else you want to talk about?
Okay. There's so many things to say. I've had multiple out of body experiences, and I think that they're relevant. What I do notice is that we can have out of body experiences, and we can see how easily we can travel from one place to another. And in some of our out of body experiences, like my first out of body experience, I just projected 4,000 miles away, and it was outside my childhood home. There was a little park, and so I was there, the most vivid experience of my life, convincing in its essence of being real. And I saw a car parked, and I wanted to get some evidence. And so I fought myself over. It was a point in space. I fought myself over the car. I saw a newspaper, and I got so excited. And I think you're always connected to that body, that I went boom, right back to my body. I just got too excited. You got to manage your emotions.
Some folks might meditate. You intentionally remote view. I don't want to mistake the
Yeah.
two, remote viewing versus projection. They sound similar, but in terms of your where your soul is versus your body is, maybe you can differentiate.
Right. We can, they used to call remote viewing clairvoyance. And, clairvoyance can be very similar to out of body experiences. One could argue that what is the metaphysics of that? What is the distinction? But in my experience, it was such a vivid sense of being there. We might think of our experience as having, the figure ground. Are you familiar with that concept where, there's so many things that come into our awareness, but we're focusing on only some of those things. We can't focus on everything at once. And so there's a way that we as beings, in a sense, in more subtle ways while we're living, but very clearly when we've left our bodies, that we're in a sense everywhere. We're part of the whole. And yet we're also can be very focused. And I think that focused part of us is what other people can experience as an apparition, for example. My focus was so fully at that place and time that it may have been me being there. After all, is our relationship to our body. Our bodies the more we learn about our bodies, the more we learn about intelligence throughout the system. So our bodies are part of us, but we're more than our bodies. We know through near-death experiences, between life experiences, mediumistic experiences, and all their varieties, reincarnation experiences. It tells a pretty clear story about how we incarnate. And then when our vehicle, our vessel, is no longer capable of functioning, then we move back into our natural and normal spiritual state. We see something similar with out-of-body experiences. So in an out-of-body experience, we can leave our bodies. In my case, one of my out-of-body experiences, I sat up in bed and I realized that it was too easy. If you're laying flat on your back and you sit up, that's a sit-up. When you're doing that. And for me, it was like, shoo, with complete ease. And I thought that was too easy. Looked down and I was luminous. I looked like an apparition, right? So that's that focus. When we saw the people in the foyer, we could symbolize that.
I've had my wife tell me that once she woke up, she has the gift. She's actually seen Zach as a full body apparition early on at the house, sitting on the stairs in the basement, just looking at us. watching us as if he might sit there, in normal times. But on our headboard above my head, I'm deep sleep. She saw a full white body sitting
Yes.
over
Yeah.
me on the
Yeah.
headboard. And for
Yeah.
the life of me, I'm like, it was the coolest thing I ever heard. The only assumption I could make was that my higher self, and I know that kind of sounds like a slam dunk. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
he's luminescent, so yeah, maybe that's a good guess. But it was amazed by first her being able to see that and not wake me up, but also that the fact that she saw what I have been feeling with the passage of time, proof of the things that I have accepted, that there is a higher self, whatever that you want to call it. I was fascinated to know that it existed
Mhm.
in that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really neat experience. This luminescent body can, when you're out of body, and it's not a near death experience, has been experienced by others. So you can leave your body, go visit your friend. And if your friend is sensitive and they may feel you there, they might see you there, right? So it's similar, right? This is not unique to death. This is just the nature of who we are as beings. And people in out of body experiences who are not near death have also experienced, what they call the realm of the dead, where they have seen people who've passed on. They've had some of the similar experiences to those people who've had a near death experience. But, there are limits. There tends to be this sense of you can go so far while you're still going to be living in your body. And that's true in out of body experiences as well. There are also other realms, which is a whole nother topic.
Yes, where there's sometimes confusion between realms, dimensions, and
Mhm.
so educate me on what a realm is or is not.
Uh-huh. Well, this is all a process of discovery. But one thing that I do know is that people who are in expanded consciousness can experience the same realms together. So there can be an subjective or, a proto objective nature to some of these other realms. And, one of them we call the astral. Indigenous cultures talk about a lower realm and an upper realm. And many people, particularly people who've had psychedelic experiences, talk about many realms. And so, I'm still in the process of coming to understand all this for myself. But I do know that there are certain realms that are adjacent to this particular realm, which we call the physical. I think the word physical is misleading because in the West, at least, we have this idea that that means non experiencing matter. And I think the more that we learn about the nature of the world, the more we are able to see experience, right down to the micro level as permeating reality. And of course, I have my own ideas as to what that means.
Yes, yes, and it's all very fascinating. You want to talk more about your book?
Yeah, it's a little bit too early on. I'm in the process of a major revision, but I do have a website, and that's lisamchristie.com. And, I try to keep it up to date with videos and articles and the like. And so if anybody's interested in connecting with me there, that would be
Yeah,
welcome.
I was doing a bit of my homework and preparing to meet with you. On top of everything else, Lisa is a prolific on the X platform. That's kind of how I first became aware of her. And Lisa, I want to thank you for always being very generous with your time in that platform. And then certainly when we had built enough rapport where I kind of meekly came in and said, Lisa, I have this idea, and I really think that we could help a lot of people by having some dialogue on this subject matter. And to the degree that you ever want to come back, you're going to be more than welcome. There will be a place. I do have resources on our website. So when you do have your book, and if you do have it published on Amazon, especially, I'll be happy to put a link in the resources on the website as well. And even offline, I look forward to having dialogue, email conversations, and keep advancing this theme of quantum healing. There's I think a lot to unpack, pardon the pun, and your expertise and knowledge is certainly a big part of that. And so thank you for helping me get this message out.
Thank you so much for asking me to participate. It's been a real pleasure, and I really value the work that you're doing, bringing kind of this more to people, to know that this isn't it. You don't have just this one life and that's over. Then there's so much more. And it's, we can think of it as a great adventure, and we know things are going to open up much more and the beyond. And people are not lost to us. We can connect with them now, and we will certainly be with them again, which is one of the great joys of life.
What a beautiful way to end the show. So thank you. God bless and be
Thank
well.
you.
And I will talk to you again.
Okay.